famiglia è aperta. Now, we're going to come si brucia questa taglia lei si brucerà la mia anima. E dovrò uscire mostra. Like if you never met Tom, I say, Billy, we're lucky to meet Tom. Very soft, very slightly, to the side. Don't say, Billy, Tom is a friend of ours. Tom would be big, he's a friend of ours. When you're referring to a member of the organization, you're saying friend about the person. Don't kiss. Years ago, we used to kiss each other. Now we're trying to stop it because we're all here to bring in some new members into our family. And more than that, to start maybe a new beginning.
This solved the problem of proving the existence of the organization.
We protect you and your family, and you're going to protect us and our family.
It's the recording that changed the face of organized crime in New England forever.
The first ever mafia induction ceremony caught on tape. We're still talking about it today because it hasn't happened since.
It was a ceremony aimed at brokering underworld peace and growing the ranks of Cosa Nostra, yet its lasting legacy turned out to be much different, shrinking one of the nation's most powerful criminal organizations by devastating the ranks of the Patriarca crime family from the top down. And in the end, not all would honor the underworld promise they took that day, known as OMERTÁ. Did he break his oath?
The oath that he took on October the 29th, 1989? Absolutely. Absolutely. And I hope for his sake, his soul doesn't burn, because that's exactly the translation as I remember it.
30 years ago, on October 29, 1989, a house on this street was the site of a secret mob induction ceremony, opening the books to welcome in new members to the New England crime family. These ceremonies had never before been seen or heard by anyone outside the ranks of Cosa Nostra, but what the 20 mobsters who were here that day didn't know is the FBI had wired up the house. At mid-morning that Sunday, they began to arrive. Among the first, Joseph J.R. Russo, seen in this FBI photo from that day.
Here's J.R. again.
Here's a better shot of Russo from Target 12 undercover video recorded around the same time. Russo had recently been promoted to consigliere, or advisor, a top-level position in the crime family. With Russo in this photo is Mafia capo Vincent Ferrara. The wise guys were being shuttled in from another location to avoid clogging the tight neighborhood with cars and drawing unnecessary attention. Eventually, the boss showed up, Raymond Jr. Patriarca, who was chauffeured by mobster Angelo Sonny Mercurio, seen on the right. Jr. Patriarca is the son of legendary New England mob boss Raymond L.S. Patriarca. The elder Patriarca died 5 years earlier.
I mean, he was an icon. He was, if you looked up Mafia Don in the dictionary, Raymond Patriarca's picture is going to be right next to it.
Retired Special Agent Walt Steffens worked for the FBI from 1984 to 2008 and has never given an interview about his role in the legendary team that captured the induction ceremony. He recalls being on the phone with a fellow agent taking these pictures from another location.
And I remember him sotto voce yelling in my ear, "It's Raymond. It's Raymond. We've got Raymond."
What was that moment like when you learned the boss was walking?
Like the Patriots scoring a touchdown in the Super Bowl. 4
men were scheduled to take the Mafia oath that day. Vincent Federico of Boston, Carmen Titora of Brockton, Richard Floramo of Everett, and Robert Bobby DeLuca of Lincoln, Rhode Island. I talked to a neighbor here on Guild Street who did not want to go on camera, but she tells me she remembers that day very well. She said a bunch of cars showed up and well-dressed men went into the house. She figured it was to celebrate the baptism of a newborn baby. As it turns out, it was a baptism of a different kind. Before the ceremony began, Patriarca had something to say. You will occasionally hear a television playing in the background.
We're all here to bring in some new members of our family. And more than that, to start maybe a new beginning with all the past fathers behind us. But they're coming to our family to start a new thing with us. Hopefully, it'll be a replay for what we had years past. And bygones are bygones.
To understand what Patriarca meant by start a new beginning, we have to go back in time 4 months to June 1989.
The body of the family's second-in-command, William Billy Grasso, was found along a Connecticut river. 1 gunshot to the neck.
56-year-old Francis Salemme of Sharon, Massachusetts, described as a leading organized crime figure, was shot in the chest and leg.
The body of mob underboss Billy Grasso, Raymond Jr. Patriarca's second-in-command, was found on the same day mobster Francis Cadillac Frank Salemme was shot in an attempted gangland slaying. Salemme survived after scrambling into a nearby pizza shop.
Many law enforcement officials feel that the shootings of Grasso and Salemme may not be the end of the violence that we'll see within the Patriarca crime family.
It's a very radical time and violent time, and lines are being drawn.
The Boston Globe's Shelley Murphy was working across town at the Boston Herald when the bloodshed began.
The Mafia was being dismantled. It was facing one prosecution after the, it was battered by prosecutions. Many Mafia members were in prison. It was a tough time for the New England mob.
The first to feel the sting of those federal prosecutions was Jerry Angiulo of Boston, the underboss to Raymond L.S. Patriarca. Angiulo's arrest in 1983 put a halt to his ascension to the underworld throne, leaving the center of power in Providence with Junior Patriarca taking over after his father died. The Boston faction of the New England crime family was feeling uneasy. Their anxiety ratcheted up in 1988 when a brash Francis Cadillac Frank Salemme was released from prison.
And there's a feeling in Boston among this old guard that is loyal to the Angiulo faction that they're going to go to prison, and there isn't going to be anyone on the streets watching out for their interests. So they don't like Salemme. They view him as entitled and sort of greedy, and they view him as Raymond's guy. I mean, Raymond is sort of grooming Salemme to take over.
FBI Special Agent Steffens arrived in Boston the same year Salemme was released.
Patriarca family of the Cosa Nostra.
And this man, the supervisor of the FBI Boston's organized crime unit, Jim Ring, assigned Steffens to track Salemme. Why would he identify this guy as someone he'd want to assign assets to?
Frank Salemme was everywhere. He was the connection between Providence and Boston. When he got out of prison, he was looking at getting something out of the time he had spent in prison. He felt that it was his time to make money.
There's a plot to kill Salemme and the underboss at the time, Billy Grasso down in Connecticut, and actually Raymond and some others, and just seize control of the family.
Which brings us back to the induction ceremony on Guild Street.
What Boston had wanted all along, this renegade Boston faction, was new members. That was this big concession that was made after the killing of Grasso and the attempted murder of Frank Salemme. Was, okay, we'll make new members.
Ring and the others in the organized crime unit knew when the meeting was to take place, but they didn't know where.
Because we weren't sure. We had a very good idea that 34 Guild Street was going to be the location, but we'd also received information that it could take place down in Providence. We had information that it could be somewhere west of Boston, and we also had information it could be in and around Boston itself.
FBI agents needed a judge's approval to secure what's known as a Title III, which is authorization to put a listening device at a fixed location. But without knowing where, and with the clock ticking, the FBI wanted to use a new and controversial legal method to eavesdrop.
A roving bug, where they're able to get a judge to agree to issue, they can place a bug without the actual location. This is the first time it was done here.
Congress added to that statute to deal with the challenge of LCN members or other organized crime groups walking and talking, changing locations, renting a hotel room for one meeting, and then getting out of there.
Still, the FBI had keyed in on 34 Guild Street, and here's why. First was this man, Vincent Federico. At the time, he was in prison serving a sentence for murder. Remember, he's one of the men who was set to be sworn in that day. Federico applied for a furlough to get out of prison for the weekend, stating in his application he would be at 34 Guild Street.
And they pulled the papers for Vinny Federico's furlough, and on the papers he writes he needs the weekend furlough for, quote, family business, which apparently was the truth.
Quite literal. But it was no sure thing. Organized Crime Task Force Chief Diane Kottmeyer would later testify they were wary of Federico's prison paperwork.
I did not believe Vincent Federico would be stupid enough to put in his furlough application the time, date, and location of a mafia induction ceremony.
More importantly, though, was this man, Angelo Sonny Mercurio. Remember, he's the mafia soldier who drove Junior Patriarca to the house that day. History would reveal Mercurio wasn't just a chauffeur, he was an FBI informant.
He had spent some time in prison, and the way the story goes is that the mafia didn't take care of him or his family while he was away, and he kind of felt like that he wasn't being treated very well.
And Mercurio was also under investigation by the FBI and would later be ensnared in an extortion case.
And that was the hammer over Sonny Mercurio's head.
But why hold such a highly secretive mafia ceremony in a nondescript, cramped house in a Boston suburb? Well, 34 Guild Street was owned by Vinny Federico's sister and her husband, and he asked them to use the house for the weekend. The mob, however, couldn't have picked a worse spot.
As good fortune would have it, there was an FBI agent living 2 doors down from the address 34 Guild Street, and one of the agents on my squad, Joe Hannigan, said, "Hey, I think Stan Moody lives 2 houses down from this address, or a couple of houses down from this address."
That is unbelievable.
And that's exactly how it unfolded.
What are the chances of that?
Well, I mean, it just goes it's sort of a hard luck family, the New England family. I mean, the idea that they very carefully picked this place.
24 hours before the ceremony, investigators were watching as the homeowners of 34 Guild Street, again Vincent Federico's sister, packed up and left.
That afternoon of Saturday the 28th, they threw a couple of pieces of luggage in the back of their car, and they headed north. And one of our surveillance teams followed them up into New Hampshire, and once we confirmed that they were out of town, we assumed for the weekend, we came back and set up on the residence and prepared for the entry that night.
Microphones were placed on the first floor and a finished section of the basement because agents weren't sure where in the house the ceremony would actually take place.
The decision was made to go with a hard wire, and so posing as utility men, some of our agents strung a wire along the telephone poles through the neighborhood.
With the microphones inside the home, FBI technicians strung a wire from 34 Guild Street out to the telephone poles and up the road to 16 Guild Street, the home of Special Agent Stan Moody. But there was a problem. 16 and 34 Guild Street are on the same side and around a slight bend, so agents would have a hard time taking pictures of who was coming and going from 34 Guild Street, which would have made it harder to know exactly who they were listening to. So the FBI took a chance. A group of agents knocked on the door here at a home across the street. The homeowners were leaving for the day and, with no questions asked, let their neighbor and his co-workers in to camp out, giving agents a perfect vantage point to 34 Guild Street. These are their pictures: Junior Patriarca, Sonny Mercurio, and J.R. Russo. Later to arrive was Rhode Island mob capo Matthew Matty Guglielmetti, Charles Quintana of Boston, Anthony Spagnola, as well as Biagio Di Giacomo, a Sicilian-born capo who you will hear administer the oath in Italian. But the peering lenses also spotted a mystery guest.
There's this woman in the photos, and who is this person? Was there a woman at the Mafia induction ceremony? And it turns out that that was a woman named Patty Papa, who worked for the mayor of the city of Boston at the time. She worked like in neighborhood services.
Mayor Ray Flynn.
Mayor Ray Flynn, and she was friendly with Vinnie Federico, and apparently she picked him up at the prison that day and drove him to the house. And unbeknownst to all of the mobsters who were burning, holy cards and pricking their trigger fingers, she's in the cellar the whole time. She's down in the basement watching television.
Noticeably absent, Cadillac Frank Salemme.
I know that he resented the fact that there was this peace made with the induction ceremony, given the fact that these same men had tried to kill him and had in fact shot him.
Once everyone is gathered inside 34 Guild Street, mobster Biagio Di Giacomo opens the ceremony. Federico was the first to be sworn in, his trigger finger pricked as part of the ceremony. De Luca was next. The image of the Patriarca family's patron saint is burned in his hands. Then to Torah. Finally, Floramo. The men then spent a considerable amount of time discussing how to properly introduce fellow made members to each other.
Like if you've never met Thomas, I say, Billy, we'd like you to meet Thomas. Very soft, very slightly, to the side. Don't say, Billy, Thomas is a friend of ours. Thomas be Billy, he's a friend of ours. Only when you're referring to a member of the organization, you're a friend of ours. Don't kiss. This is all we used to kiss each other. Now we're trying to stop it because we
And the boss talks business.
Anybody at this stage can aid you in a business, legitimate or illegitimate, your obligation is to come to us first.
Hours later, the group disbands, and right before closing the door on 34 Guild Street, Ferrara mutters one of the most ironic phrases likely ever caught on an FBI bug.
Only the gross knows what really took place over here today, my God.
Four men were allegedly sworn in as made members of the Patriarca crime family in a ceremony at a private home in Medford, Massachusetts 2 years ago. Much of what was played in court today, however, had to do with seating arrangements and food.
The FBI recordings were played publicly for the first time at a 1991 trial in Connecticut. Part of the case centered on the gangland slaying of Billy Grasso. Junior Patriarca was also arrested in the major organized crime sweep, as were others from the Guild Street meeting. While the indictment specifically cited the induction ceremony, the men weren't charged with anything that happened on October 29th, 1989.
But all that's perfectly legal. Go ahead and have as many ceremonies as you want. But for proving the organization which is essential for the RICO statute and which allows enhanced sentences, enhanced fines, and that sort of thing. You have to be able to prove the organization.
So here you have this ceremony where it was proof. It was finally proof that this is real.
The recordings made national news. This is then Attorney General Richard Thornburg.
This is the first time that it has been established beyond doubt that this type of secret clandestine organization exists.
None but a lot of hookwick that you people have been giving me for a long time.
Think about it. In 1972, the namesake of the New England crime family testified before Congress and said, essentially, the government was full of it when it came to organized crime. 17 years later, his own son would preside over a ceremony caught on tape that would expose the truth.
Any comment, Mr. Bianco? Could you tell us anything?
Nothing, thank you.
Among those to fall to a RICO conviction was Nicholas Bianco, who took over as mob boss in the wake of the induction ceremony recordings.
If you think you're going to intimidate me with the camera, you're not. I wish you to leave.
Mob capo Matty Guglielmetti, Patriarca, and many others who attended the ceremony also felt the sting of RICO convictions.
When you look at what the Bureau has done over the course of decades, utilizing the RICO statute, the enterprise theory of investigation, we've done a very effective job at significantly disrupting the stranglehold that the LCN has had on a multitude of different industries.
Joseph Bonavolanta is the special agent in charge of the Boston office of the FBI.
That code of silence, or that oath of omertà, as we all know through cases that we've taken down through several years, is not nearly followed as it once was. It's in a way kind of been shattered.
Shattered omertà brings us to Bobby DeLuca. His star rose after the 1990 indictments because the power vacuum vaulted Cadillac Frank Salemme to boss of the family, and DeLuca and Salemme were tight. They were both later charged in a 1995 case, and that's when they learned mobsters James Whitey Bulger and Stephen the Rifleman Flemme were longtime top echelon informants for the FBI.
They realized two things. Number one, they've been betrayed by their closest, close associates. And the second thing is they realized that you can't really trust anybody. You don't know who an informant is. I mean, they find out during those hearings that Sonny Mercurio was an informant.
DeLuca was released from prison in 2006. Then he too began cooperating with the government. Former State Police Colonel Stephen O'Donnell says DeLuca reached out to him as DeLuca's prison sentence was coming to a close. What did he tell you? Why did he want to do it?
Well, I think I'm positive that he had a family, he had a young family, he had a new wife, new family, and he was just tired of being in prison. He felt betrayed by the leaders of Cosa Nostra, and I think twofold. One, vengeance is the best way to get back at people.
O'Donnell says DeLuca also hoped to clear the way in an effort to become boss himself.
From his perspective, if I cooperate, then I create this void in leadership, remove the leadership, and maybe in his mind he thought that he could take over as the boss.
That never happened, and in 2011, DeLuca was an unnamed cooperating witness in a case that brought down 9 members and associates of the New England crime family. Court records revealed DeLuca wore an FBI wire against several mobsters.
He's suspecting other people in the family are informants, and I think he's saying what we've heard he's saying, based on his own words, is that he's not about to do a day for some of these people that he doesn't trust anymore.
DeLuca would cooperate again in a 2016 case, this time against his old pal, Frank Salemme. How difficult do you think that was for DeLuca to testify against Frank Salemme in that trial?
Well, I don't think it's difficult at all. I think he made that decision when he took that step to reach out, to talk to me. They all disrespect each other in every different capacity. It's such a perverse world. So I don't think he gave it two thoughts, that I'm going to do what I got to do to take care of Bobby DeLuca, not take care of Frank Salemme.
No honor among thieves.
Absolutely.
DeLuca's testimony helped convict Salemme for the 1993 murder of a Boston nightclub owner whose body was exhumed from behind a Providence mill building in 2016. DeLuca himself was sentenced to 5 years for lying to federal agents in 2011 about what he knew of that murder. For his part, Salemme also cooperated with the government in the 90s, but Salemme only shared what he knew about Bulger and Flemme and their corrupt relationship with the FBI.
What does omertà mean? For Frank Salemme, omertà obviously meant not giving up his friends in the mafia.
And he stuck to it.
And he stuck to that.
Junior Patriarca was released from prison in 1998.
There's no such thing as resigning. It's not
As you heard in the induction ceremony, there's only one way in, one way out. Because the mafia has been so broken and disbanded, some of those rules have not been enforced over the years. So he just went on to other things. He was, I wouldn't say forced out, but he resigned to move out. There was so much respect for his father that he was allowed to just move on.
What about the man who chauffeured Patriarca to the ceremony that day, mobster Sonny Mercurio? Once he was outed as an informant, Mercurio entered the witness protection program after he was released from prison. He died in Little Rock, Arkansas in 2007.
He said he regretted it, that he had wished he had never done that. If you live in that life and you're taught about OMERTÁ, and maybe he thought he could keep it a secret and get some benefit from it. I don't think he set out to be an FBI informant, and I think the fact that he definitely regretted it.
We get in our life with this organization, and the only way we're going to get out is death, no matter what. There's no hope, no Jesus, no Madonna, nobody can help us if we ever keep it this secret from anybody.
While the FBI recordings played a major role in decimating the ranks of the Cosa Nostra through RICO convictions, law enforcement experts say the New England crime family is still considered a threat in the region.